Hello, everyone. I've been a little sick today, so it is what it is. But for my first article, I chose the What's in a Word by Miss Greta B. and the Sociology of Emotions. And so, whenever I think about collective guilt in the form of words, I think about how some parents say things to their small children like differently in public than like if they'd been at home. And like I saw a girl at the aquarium get pulled to the side and spoken into in like a stern whisper a couple weeks ago, and it just reminded me how this was absolutely like humiliating to me, or like I had this happen to me and I was totally humiliated by it. Um, I know that there's like a term used for different emotions in Japanese culture that I know that we don't have in English, and it makes me think of how the idea of labeling theory comes to my mind when I think of what's in a word and how words shape how people feel about themselves as well as how they act because of it. And the words that people use to describe themselves versus others has a huge impact on how we feel and how we act in the world. And so this article cemented the term amoyari in my brain and made me realize that emotion words have a huge impact on culture and in different societies. And I did not think about how describing someone as angry would be impactful in any way, but it and the other words in the article that the article talks about show that there is a huge difference in how people express themselves. Um, the author, Mesquita, makes the point that emotion words in English do not mean the same thing conceptually as in other cultures because there are so many different words and expressions that people use across cultures. Overall, this article taught me that how we conceptualize emotions depends on how a society expects people to express themselves in general, rather than just like a single emotional event. And an example of how emotion words change depending on like the culture is rather something like for my example, it's like something generational, and like for a more relaxed example, my friends and I say things like like I'm dead or I'm dying when something's really funny, and my grandparents and my parents like they don't understand this at all. Like oh, why do you say that? And it's like just because it's funny. I don't know, but like my parents and grandparents won't even use like so they don't even say the words dead or dying in the first place, so the fact that we use it when something's funny seems totally backwards to them. And dead or dying have become emotion words in Gen Z slang that previously were not expressed that way, and this shows that emotion words and expression is learned socially through instead of being something innate. And so for my next article, I'm doing the what we regret most and why. And this one is whenever I think about what people regret most about their lives, it makes me think about how some people will live the same, how people will live the same their entire life, but on their deathbed, they'll admit to all these things that they wish they could have done or stuff they'd done differently. And like it could be stuff such as I wish I'd spent more time with my family instead of working all the time, or that I didn't make connections or reconnecting with people, or not taking a risk that could have helped you out. And I believe that as long as you have your best interest at heart and you're happy, it's really all that matters. But since we are covering the subject of guilt, I believe that this article will help me better understand how regret is real, but also socially constructed. So this article is a meta-analytic study of how Americans have six biggest regrets and how they fall into different categories. I think her name is Ruiz, and Somerville found that education is the biggest regret people have, and that the increasing availability to go back to school makes people wish that they have. They found that careers, romance, parenting, self improvement, and leisure were the other biggest regrets. Like with schooling, they explain the opportunity principle and say that people use methods of rationalization to reduce their regret whenever they have limited opportunities. However, when people do have the opportunity to do things, they continue to feed into their regrets and like what they could have done differently. The authors state that opportunity principle has three stages: the action stage, where people have regrets because they acted freely; the outcome stage, where the goal is achieved or unachieved; and the recall stage, where people reframe the situation depending on if they had or did not have opportunity. Okay, and so in for my example is from an episode of Seinfeld, right, where George thinks of what he could have said like after he gets embarrassed during a meeting, and instead of just letting it go, he talks to Jerry and becomes obsessed with what he will say to his coworker and how he will say it so that he humiliates the coworker in the same way. And since it's seen as unacceptable for men to feel shame and guilt, he internalizes his feelings and tries to get back at his coworker and goes way out of his way to do so. And he says his line, and his coworker responds with something even better. And then George makes a comment about the man's wife that just totally backfires, and it leads to a much worse outcome than if he had just let it go. And overall, initial regret that we have for something that we didn't do or say can lead to way more guilt in the long term. And it is important to be true to yourself while not beating yourself up for who you are.